It's coming down to the wire for the latest deadline given to Benjamin Netanyahu to form a new Israeli government. The prime minister-designate has until midnight Wednesday local time to tell President Isaac Herzog he has the final approvals from his coalition partners to present that incoming government, and he's expected to do that tomorrow, despite some last-minute wrangling. Slowing the process has been the need to pass controversial new laws demanded by other party leaders to get their consent. And this evening, the Likud Knesset Speaker Yariv Levin announced that all parliamentary activity will be frozen until next Monday, indicating Netanyahu has their agreement to go ahead and present his government tomorrow without first passing those laws. Today, though, the Knesset did approve the first reading of perhaps the most controversial of these bills, the one that gives the designated national security minister, the far-right politician Itamar Ben-Gvir, expanded powers over the Israeli police. The debate in the plenum over the so-called Ben-Gvir law was heated. Here's a bit of what he and Yesh Atid lawmaker Merav Ben-Ari had to say.
I was shocked that the Attorney General objected to us writing that the police commissioner is subordinate to the government. Who is the commissioner subordinate to? Maybe to the Attorney General? Maybe to the prosecutor's office? Only in the police states the commissioner works under his own authority and is not subordinate to anyone.
I think you are making a mistake. This is a grave mistake, and I will tell you this over and over again. Even though all the media love and embrace you, you don't understand the police. You sat on my Knesset committee, you were very active, and you came on tours in the field. What you deserve, but you should go and learn the police from the inside.
And joining me in the studio is our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman, and our political correspondent, Batya Leventhal. And Batya, it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu managed to convince those other party leaders, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, Aryeh Deri, the United Torah Judaism Party. Let's go ahead. Let's present this government. We'll work out those laws in the coming week or two.
Absolutely, and all the news media are breaking the fact that Netanyahu, as you also mentioned, is likely to announce a government by the deadline tomorrow being the midnight strike between Wednesday and Thursday. But I have to tell you, Calev, as someone who was at the Likud primary headquarters when it was announced that this is the party that was going to be voted in and Benjamin Netanyahu will have a government, I believe his exact words were, it's going to take us exactly 7 days to eject Yair Lapid. We are now almost 2 months past that day. We are almost at January 1st. And he still has not put this government through. And I think that's quite evident to just how complicated. I don't even think Benjamin Netanyahu himself knew just how many demands were going to be put in front of him. But it does seem like he was playing chicken there a little bit at the end. But it's likely that he is going to come through with an announcement tomorrow of having a government. How stable this government is going to be is a different question, given the policies that might be coming through. But it's definitely looking very positive, if you can put it that way, for Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow.
It is, but complicated may be an understatement, Owen, because as I've said, he still has to get these laws through the Knesset. He does have the majority, but clearly he understands there are difficulties involved with these laws, a lot of controversy, for example, over that so-called Ben-Gvir law.
Right, and he does get a little bit of time, Calev. There is a difference, a gap in time between the time when Netanyahu goes to Isaac Herzog and tells him that he's been able to form a government. One would imagine he has to do so in good faith. Although, again, he does have, even if it doesn't have full coalition agreements in tow with all these parties, it's clear that they're going to be in coalition with him. But after that, he has a gap in time before, through the parliamentary procedure of the Israeli Knesset, the government is actually sworn in.
So a couple of weeks, I think, generally.
A week, maybe two in this case, because of the vagaries of how the parliament works. And as you mentioned, Calev, at the top, this delay until Monday of when the Knesset will reconvene. At any rate, he gets that extra time to get this legislation across the finish line, satisfy those coalition partners before those ministers are actually sworn in. Again, the idea would be that once Itamar Ben-Gvir is actually sworn in as national security minister, he'll have the powers that this law is giving him. Once Bezalel Smotrich is sworn in as finance minister and gets that ministry within the defense ministry, that he'll have the powers in hand that is needed to be able to do what he wants to do in the West Bank. So that's the working assumption. Of course, one never knows if the legislation will actually get through in time, but I think the understanding here in Israel and the expectation is that it will be. But both of you are absolutely right. These coalition negotiations were much harder than Netanyahu led his public to believe. Although, again, I think just by the dynamics of how complex negotiations work, I've been saying this from day one, it seemed obvious, at least to me, it was going to go down to the wire, and down to the wire it has gone. And of course, the controversy surrounding this legislation and the relatively unusual position of legislation of this magnitude and this scope and this number, 4 bills, having to be passed before the swearing in.
Right. And by the way, we're talking about these 4 bills, and maybe not even the most controversial piece of legislation that a lot of his coalition members want to pass. Let's listen to Yesh Atid Knesset member Vladimir Belyak referring to that today.
I don't think that every law that the majority wants to legislate or is interested in passing is invalid, and not every law is kosher. And in connection with this, your intention going forward to pass the judicial override law in essence says there are no more precedents, there are no more rules, there's no common interest that unites us or defines us as a democratic society. Democracy is not just majority rule. Democracy is also standards. Democracy is also basic law. Democracy is also minority rights.
And Batya, that judicial override law, which wasn't even part of the coalition agreements before the government, that may be crucial because some of these laws we've been discussing they are going to face legal challenges, and the Supreme Court may have to rule on them. And of course, the Knesset, the new government wants the Knesset to be able to override those rulings.
And they will be able to ride that just with a simple majority if that's what actually gets pushed through. I think besides just how difficult this was going to be or supposed to be for Benjamin Netanyahu to actually put this together, after spending the last 6 weeks in the Israeli parliament, I can tell you that there's been the same thing with regards to the opposition, similar to what was being said here. This is a legitimate government that was voted in by the people, but there's a lot of illegitimate workings that they are now coming through the cracks. And I think that that really just highlights what we are likely to see in the coming weeks with regards to laws like this override law that many are going to say is, in fact, an illegitimate law in its very foundations of it. But the truth is, this is a law that can get passed by the Knesset. It will likely have further implications, as you mentioned, to the other laws that are being discussed right now, being that they can completely override any decision that the Supreme Court makes just by a simple majority.
Right, but the question is, if Benjamin Netanyahu wants to see this law passed, because you notice that this is not one of the agreements. There was some of the talk that some of the parties, especially Bezalel Smotrich, wanted this law passed as part of the coalition agreement. So far, we haven't seen that.
Yeah, Netanyahu hasn't shown a great deal of enthusiasm for this particular piece of legislation, Calev. At any rate, he is positioning himself, as we all know, particularly in interviews in the English language to foreign media, as a kind of arbiter, right, between those coalition partners and what they have said they want to do and more mainstream Israeli public opinion.
I'd even say a backstop may be more appropriate here.
Absolutely. Choose your analogy, choose your description, but you're absolutely right. Again, there's been a lot of focus on issues of religion and state, but it also is true of these other pieces of legislation, and certainly that override law, which would completely change the balance of power between the court system and the parliament here in Israel. So again, Netanyahu kind of positioning himself as he might like to put it, as a responsible adult or as an arbiter between the coalition partners and more mainstream Israeli public opinion. And by the way, Calev, we've seen polls over the last weeks that a lot of moves that the coalition is making and a lot of the people who are going to be taking those ministries, that these moves are not necessarily popular among the Israeli public. If you ask one by one about these, you often will get a majority against them. Again, that's not the entire story, right? Because of course, this is a government that was elected through a democratic election, and this is part of the coalition negotiations. But at any rate, take that for what it's worth.
Laws like the Aryeh Dairy law that will allow him to again take office are not proving very popular. Batya Leventhal, Owen Alterman, thank you for that.